Family time.
Hi, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Family Time. Welcome to our listeners on Love 101 on the Facebook page and on YouTube Live. This is Family Time. Now, Family Time is about your issues, your relationships, your at home family, your community family, and your global family. Now, Family Time is produced by Family Life Ministries, and our aim is to enable healthy families, which will lead to healthy nations. So stay with us and please connect with us via all our platforms. Friend us on Facebook at FLM Family Life Ministries. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Family Life Ministries FLMJA, and on Instagram, keep up with what's happening at simply FLMJA. While Family Time is a family program, we'd like to caution that it may, on odd occasions, touch on what some may consider mature subject matters. Your discretion is advised. I'm Crystal Daly Thompson, and today we're going to talk about breast cancer. Now, do you know your risk of getting breast cancer? It is the most common cancer among Jamaican women, and by the way, men get breast cancer too. It is estimated that 1 in 21 Jamaican women will be diagnosed with breast cancer. So it is very likely that you or someone you know has been or will be impacted by breast cancer. Therefore, this evening, we're on a mission to empowering your life in the fight against breast cancer. There's a lot to talk about today, and we have two special guests who will help us to unpack rather the survival strategies of overcoming breast cancer. I hope we get through it all. It's so much to talk about. And while we do that, we want to hear from you. So tell us how you fought or is fighting breast cancer. Send your answers via WhatsApp, text, and voice notes. Make sure it's no longer than 30 seconds, and you can send them to 876-997-3125 or call the studio lines at 876-968-8327 to 8 to participate. You can also watch us and comment live on Love 101 Facebook and YouTube. We'll be right back with our special guests who are Professor Maya Clark Kataya and Reverend Eugenie French. Don't go anywhere. One has been through the fight, the other makes it their mission to get you through the fight. We'll be right back. This is FLM, Love 101.
We've been questioning the institution of marriage for a very long time. Recently, these questions have quadrupled. As first described in Genesis and later affirmed by Jesus, marriage is a God-ordained covenant relationship between a man and a woman. That's what the Bible says. But how has this covenant changed? Listen this Tuesday, October 29 at 10 a.m. for The Rock. As guests, Bishop Cleon Grandison and Daniel Dodd will join our host to talk about marriage. How has marriage changed? And has it for the better? How much of marriage is for the sake of God's instruction or man's laws? That's The Rock this Tuesday, October 29 at 10 a.m. It will be on the family station, Love 101.
All right, listeners, welcome back to Family Time on Love 101, and welcome to our special guests, Professor Maya Clark Kataya, inaugural Evelyn Lauder Associate, Dean for Nurse Practitioner Programs, and Professor at Hunter Bellevue School of Nursing. We also have a 20-year breast cancer survivor, Reverend Eugenie French, a pastor, educator, wife, mother, and grandmother. She's also the vice president of Jamaica Reach to Recovery and the vice chair on the board. How are you both?
I'm very well, thank you.
I'm doing great, thank you. How are you?
I am well, thank you. It's great to have you on FLM. Now, a lot of women are listening. As it is, we've said here from the statistics that the numbers are alarming. It's the numbers are high for breast cancer diagnosis across Jamaica. So the question I have here: how does one fight against breast cancer? Let's just start there.
So, I'm going to start talking a little bit about statistics, particularly in the U.S. and Jamaica. As you've already heard, about 1 in 21 Jamaican women will be diagnosed with breast cancer. In the U.S., it's about 1 in 8 women who get diagnosed with breast cancer in their lifetime. And Black women in particular typically are diagnosed at earlier stages,
Okay.
maybe 4 or 5 years younger than white women.
Oh wow.
So, yes. And in addition to that, Black women have the highest rates of breast cancer death. So we're talking about 40% higher than white women in recent years in particular. We know that this is related to Black women being diagnosed or being told they have cancer at much more advanced stages, particularly those diseases that are metastatic. So meaning that the cancer has spread outside of the breasts,
Okay.
and that they can also be more aggressive types of breast cancer, meaning they duplicate more quickly and so they grow faster. And so when we're thinking about that, I want us to also think about that there's some data that suggests that the statistics in Jamaican women are more alarming than that of Black women in America, which are the statistics I just gave you. And
Okay.
so there's some good news.
Yes.
I think some of the concern is that for Jamaican women, I'm saying that American women are diagnosed at 4 to 5 years younger than most white women.
Yes.
Jamaican women can be even younger than that.
Oh wow.
And so the good news is there are some things that we can do, primarily focusing on early detection and treatment, as you were saying. The earlier we detect it, the better we do. So if we detect it at early stages, the survival rate is like 90%.
Okay. So let me ask this, Professor Kataya. Are there any environmental factors then that would contribute to that, considering that we're seeing the numbers, the disparity with international patients versus Jamaican patients?
There's definitely been some environmental factors that have been indicated. There have been lifestyle and genetic factors as well that have been indicated. And so thinking about how we live in terms of smoking, eating, drinking, and then exposures to pollutions and things of that nature can also contribute. And so the recommendation is that we control the things that we can control. So what we're putting into our bodies, how well we're taking care of our bodies, thinking
Yes.
about exercising, water, eating well, not consuming alcohol, not using tobacco. Those are things that we can control. We can't necessarily control our exposures to pollutants and things of that nature.
Okay, so before I go to Reverend French, just want to ask, do you have any background information on some of the lifestyle factors that are affecting women primarily? Is it that Jamaican women we have poor dieting? Is it that we're a highly stressed nation of women? What do you think contribute?
That's a very good question. I think it's a compilation of things. I think that we, as Black women in general, given our lineage, that puts us at risk from our genetics perspective. Pollution also puts us at risk. There's a stress component as well. And and then we have to think about what we're doing to our bodies. So are we exercising enough? Are we consuming enough nutrition? Are we drinking enough, fluids? But some of it is, and a large component of it is outside of our control for sure.
Okay, so I'm just going to put this to you, and then I'm going to go to Reverend French. But just for you to think about, I've been reading a few things about dense breast, and that a lot of Black women, we typically have dense breast. This is how,
Myself included.
yes, this is how our breast develops.
Correct.
So
Correct.
this seems to be something more genetic of the race, and why does it seem to be mutating to be causing breast cancer? Now, that is something I want you to answer after I get to to Dr. French to hear from her
Perfect.
about her survival strategies, and of course, how did she come to know that either she was at risk, then realizing that she is in fact a patient. We want you to share with us, Reverend French, what that was like.
Okay, thank you very much. So my journey with breast cancer started in October of 2003.
Yes.
I I was aware of cancer because I had two aunts who died from the disease, and so I I would say that I was not paying sufficient attention to get screened because I was one of those who believe that if it's on my father's side, then I didn't have to pay attention. So in when I realized that I had the disease, it was devastating. But I had a fight. I was very militant,
Yes.
in seeing it as something that is coming to attack me. So it happened one day when I was lying in bed, and my hand passed across my right breast, and I felt something I would now refer to as a thickening in a vertical position. And when I feel around the other areas, it was not there. I didn't feel the same thing, and I did not feel the same thing in the other breast. And so, as I investigated, I realized that this thing was right there, rooted to the spot. And immediately, I would have heard about the Jamaica Cancer Society, so my thoughts went there, and I went immediately to get a clinical examination done. And when I went, the nurse felt the same thing, and she agreed that something was there to get further checked. So she made an appointment for me to see the doctor there, and he referred me to the hospital. And afterwards, as I went to the hospital, they realized that I didn't have any other signs but the lump. So I was referred to do a mammogram. And I was then asked to do a surgical biopsy. So a
Okay.
surgical biopsy was done to determine um, what was actually happening in my body. So that's how I, become aware of the cancer, breast cancer in my body.
Okay. Recently, I've heard a presentation done that it's best for for early detection to be an early diagnosis, and that takes the form of before there is a lump. So
Yes,
that is detecting it early. So what I've learned recently is that finding the lump is when it has now gone to a more advanced stage. And
yes.
a lot of us Jamaican women, we're afraid of wrong diagnosis. Do you think that that is one of the reasons women stay away from being screened, and how can you encourage them to not be afraid?
Yes, women stay away from being screened for that reason, and others because they are afraid. They feel that the radiation from the mammogram would put them at risk, and so they stay away. They also feel as if that cancer is for older women,
Hmm.
but cancer does not discriminate. It doesn't matter what age you are. We are finding that, women in their 20s and
Yeah.
even at 19, we have one, member who was diagnosed at age 19. So cancer does not discriminate, and women need to, get rid of that myth that it's only found in older women. Um, and another reason that women don't want to get screened is because they say that if you don't have children, then that's another
Increases
issue.
the
Yes,
risk.
as well, right? So
Okay.
it's only they feel that if they have not had a child who they nursed, then
Yes.
they don't have to have that check
The
done.
screening done.
Right.
All right. I want you to hold that point. I know there's a lot to unpack, Reverend French, and I really want to hear more from Professor Kataya. But we're going to the break right now. We want our listeners to WhatsApp, text your voice notes, no greater than 30 seconds, rather, to 876-997-3125. Watch us and comment live on the Love 101 Facebook and YouTube platforms, or call the studio lines at 876-968-8327 or 876-968-8328 to participate. Let's get going. We'll be right back.
When tape diapers are difficult to change, it's time for Pampers Easy Up. They're easy to put on and take off, keeping their skin protected. When they begin to cry, changes are easy with easy. Hey, the Top Up Flow app is a great way to get Flow prepaid mobile plans. You know, the plans that give you real unlimited social media, YouTube, anywhere calls, and data for TikTok. And for limited time only, get a 28-day plan for only $2,900 when you activate through the app. That's a $500 saving.
The easy, convenient way to save on your Flow 28-day prepaid mobile plan with unlimited social and anywhere calls is to download the Top Up Flow app or visit topupflow.com.
Download today and start saving.
Well, if you want buy appliances for your home with the quality high and the price low, get it on Habasco. Get it on Habasco. Habasco. Be everything what you need. Habasco. It's guaranteed on Habasco. Get it on Habasco. You more, yeah, Habasco. It's for your home and living everything for your kitchen, rock up and more at Habasco. The stuff that gives you more. Habasco.
Yes, welcome back, listeners. This is Family Time, and our discussion today: empowering your life in the fight against breast cancer. We have two special guests here, Professor Maya Clark Kutaya, and we have Reverend Eugenie French, who is a survivor. Now, there's so much to talk about. We were talking just before we went on the break about, the fear that women have in being screened ahead of time, women believing that, okay, because I've had several children and not having children is a risk, they think that it's okay, they might not need to be checked. But basically what you're saying is, Reverend French, do get checked. Do get checked. But I want Professor Kataya to flesh out the dense breast situation, because I too have done a screening about 2 or 3 years ago, and I've been told that I am high risk for breast cancer because I have dense breast. And ever so often, I try to feel around to see what is happening, right? And we've heard online conventional treatments of castor oil compressions to make the tissue softer and all of these kinds of things. So flesh this out a little bit more for our listeners.
So you were not alone. I too am a woman of dense breast tissue. For those who don't know what a mammogram is, it is an X-ray of the breast. For many women, we try to do this early so that we get an idea, but it essentially, allows us to get a view of what your tissue looks like. And when they say that you have dense breasts, it just means that on that X-ray, your tissue is a little bit harder to see through. I, like I said, have the same. Having dense breasts is a risk factor for breast cancer, but it is not considered a disease or for you to have abnormal breasts. It also doesn't mean that you're going to have breast cancer. And we can't really figure out what the exact correlation is or what the relationship is between dense breasts and breast cancer. We just know that those of us who have dense breasts are at a higher risk. And so we encourage everyone to start having their mammograms as early as possible. If you don't have a risk and you have an average risk of breast cancer, meaning you don't have a family history, then you should start your mammograms at about the age of 40.
Okay.
if you have a history, a family history, either, as Reverend French said, on your mother's side or your father's side,
Yeah.
you need to have a conversation with your provider, because the recommendation is likely that you should start those mammograms a bit earlier.
Okay. All
But
right.
there really isn't, you know,
Yes.
I
We want
don't
to
have
talk.
an answer for what's causing it.
Yes, yes, yes. So we want to talk about dieting, right? Because I'm going to come back to Reverend French, because I know that since your diagnosis and everything, you would have had to change some lifestyle practices. And what are the lifestyle practices you had before? Right? So some of us can listen and say, boy, you know, me need to change that. Me need to stop eat chicken. Like me, let me put up my hand. Stop eating a lot of chicken, right? Just for argument's sake, what are some of the lifestyle practices that you know have, Reverend Eugenie?
Okay, so before I was diagnosed, I ate everything salt, mackerel, and the pigtail, and all those things. And so, after I was diagnosed, I had to change my diet, especially when I was going through the chemotherapy, and my eating habits changed, and I didn't like some things, my tongue get so, dark. Everything felt like it was. Bitter.
Oh my.
Yes. And I after I recovered, well, during the recovery period, I did change. I drank cornmeal porridge without the milk, and because the cancer the doctors diagnosed me with is estrogen driven, then I had to stay away from milk products and soy and those things. So my diet changed drastically, especially when I was fighting, when I was, just trying to go through the treatments. Now I eat in moderation.
Yeah.
I have some of those things, the chicken, and yes, but I stay away from a lot from the fried foods and the Kentucky and so on. But I do consume chicken meat, all meats, but in moderation.
Okay. So do you exercise now?
Yes, I do. I should do some more, but I do. I pay attention. And it's
We all
important.
should.
Okay. Okay. All right. So I hear you mention something here about estrogen driven breast cancer, and I'm going to throw this to Professor Katayo. So we know that hormonal imbalance can cause some of these things to happen, where you have a spike in your estrogen, and even it may throw off other balances in your reproductive system that can influence breast cancer. Enlighten us a little bit about this and how we can be very mindful. And when we go to the doctor, generally, what are some of the questions we can ask just to ensure that we're picking up on some things before we get screened?
So this is a really complicated question.
Yeah.
And so typically, as Reverend French alluded to, we don't find out what type of cancer a patient has until we've gotten to the point that we've diagnosed it and then biopsied it. And so that's when we get an opportunity to know what type of hormone you have. So whether it's, an estrogen receptor or progesterone receptor, or if it's triple, so there's right. So there's a certain level of complexity that we don't get to until we know that it's something that you have. And so I wouldn't tell any of us at this point to try to manage our hormones or the changes in our hormones to protect us against cancer.
Yes.
Because we don't really know what leads to that point. So I would tell you not to worry about that and sort of really focus on your lifestyle changes as much as possible. The things that you can change, the things you can control, those modifications are paramount. As Reverend French had referred to, the goal would be, which I am not either, is for all of us to be plant-based, right? Because the hormones are added into our red meats, our chickens. And so the recommendation is for us to have either a very plant-based diet or a Mediterranean diet. So we're not being exposed to exogenous or outside of the body type of hormones. And so I think those are the things that we can control.
Yes. 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 Yes.
The rest of it is really about our exposure. So I would definitely tell you not to try to focus on trying to prevent whether you have one or the other.
All right. So before I have a two-part question, what is in the standard Jamaican diet that you think might be influencing this? Because what is really frightening about what you said earlier is that the numbers coming out of Jamaica in comparison to the other countries are extremely high. It's already bad enough that black women are diagnosed at earlier ages and in a greater number, but for Jamaica to be standing out, it must be something in our diet. Have you looked into that, and what could that be?
So there's not a lot of literature that looks into diet and nutrition. It's one of this, which is one of the spaces that I kind of live
Yeah.
in chronic conditions. But I would say, in general, especially particularly for us as Black, Caribbean, African women, we
Mhm.
tend to eat some of the red meats,
Yes.
chickens,
Oh yes, and I love a stew peas, you know.
Mhm.
Yes, man.
and those are the things that we don't recognize hormones get pumped into. I tell my end stage renal disease patients the same things. The
Mm.
reason your chicken looks so pretty in the market is because we pumped it full of something to make it look that way. The
Yeah.
reason that your chicken leg is bigger than the organic chicken leg is because we pumped it full of something to make it look that way. And so just being mindful of what the industry is doing to the food that we consume,
Yes.
one, and two, that may be all that we have access to,
Hmm.
right? That's not a problem. As Reverend French said, we have to just make sure we're consuming things in moderation, control what we can control,
Yes.
and do the best we can do with what we have. I'm not asking people to change their diets and go to a plant-based diet because I'm not going to be able to do that either. But what are the things that we can minimize to give ourselves the best opportunity to achieve our full health potential? That's what we're striving for.
Yes. So considering that, Reverend French, you in this situation here would be a patient, a healthy patient.
A very healthy patient. She's doing beautifully from what I can tell.
You
Thank
continue
you.
to bloom and to overcome, right? But how would you guide patients through the emotional and physical
Mm.
challenges of breast cancer treatment? We heard about the bitter taste and the black tongue from the chemotherapy that you described, Reverend French. But how do you help patients to get through this?
Okay, so the first thing that uh, the treatment options are very good if we follow the doctor's advice. Excellent. But I want to put it out there that our treatment or survival depends on the person, your mental state. You know, Cancer is a monster already, and so it needs a strong individual to stave it off, to fight it. And if mentally the woman is weak, then that in itself is inhibiting survival. So how do women face up to this monster? Be positive, remove the fear.
Mm,
Remove the fear. And for me, I depend on my faith. I
yeah.
trust in God. I told cancer, you not kill me because my purpose is not yet completed. And because I held on to that mindset, I do everything with that in mind. Also, it's very important to follow the doctor's advice. They have been trained and studied in the area, and so patients need to follow the doctor's advice. Reach out. They can also reach out to other persons who
Yes.
have a diagnosis of the disease, and
Mm,
certainly, we at Jamaica Reach to Recovery are there to counsel. Yes, we are a group of breast cancer survivors. We have been there. We have done that. We have gone through the journey, and we inspire others emotionally, psychologically, and we also provide financial support, which is a big thing in terms of being diagnosed with cancer. Cancer is costly, and no one goes through it alone. And so we need each other, and we need to face it with courage.
Indeed, indeed. So to you, Professor Kataya, how do healthcare teams collaborate to provide comprehensive care to breast cancer patients?
Yes. So I think breast cancer is one of the places that we really, really, truly get it right. And that is, it's very patient centered and it's team based. So you have your primary care provider, who is likely the person who you went to, as Reverend French, alluded to and said, I felt this thing, something's off. They planned, they ordered your mammogram, whatever the case may be, so that your primary is sort of the center, your general practitioner is the center. But then you end up having a surgical oncologist. You might have a medical oncologist. So that's a cancer doctor that does surgery, and a cancer doctor that's going to manage you medically. So it might be the chemotherapy person.
Okay.
But then hopefully you're blessed with a nurse navigator. And the nurse navigator is a person who meets with you and walks you through all the testing and what the next step is. And they help coordinate your appointments, the conversations, who's doing what when, so that the patient is the center, the patient is the nucleus, but you really have a team that's rallying around you to do what you need. And like Reverend French said, cancer treatment is all about mind, body, and spirit. So
indeed.
We're going to manage our part.
Mind, body, and spirit. And it ties back to what Reverend French was just saying. All right, listeners, it's a lot of things that are being said here. I'm hoping that you're all making note of terms here. Estrogen influence, breast cancer, dense breast, dieting, all these kinds of things, all the stats. Please continue to make note, but we want to hear from you. So we encourage you to send your voice notes or text to 876-997-3125. Watch us live or comment on the Love 101 Facebook and YouTube channels. We're there live right now. Or you can call the studio lines at 876-968-8327 or 876-968-8328 to participate. Don't go anywhere. This is Family Time. We're discussing surviving breast cancer. We'll be right back.
Cancer is part of our human existence. Therefore, understanding it and empowering ourselves accordingly to fight it is of great importance. Here are 3 strategies that the Word of God advises when dealing with cancer and sickness. Number 1, request prayer from your church leadership. This advice is from James chapter 5. Is any among you sick? Let them call the elders of the church, and the prayer offered in faith will make the sick person well. Number 2, expect God to answer your prayer based on His purpose for you, not your desire to be healed. The Apostle Paul reports in 2 Corinthians 12, so to keep me from becoming conceited because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations given to me, a thorn in the flesh was given to me. Paul went on to say, 3 times I prayed for healing, but God replied, my grace is sufficient for thee, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. Paul concluded, most therefore will I glory in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Number 3, believe that God can heal you of your sickness. In Matthew 8, a man with leprosy came and knelt before the Lord Jesus and said, Lord, if you are willing, you can heal me. The Lord reached out, touched the man and said, I am willing. And immediately he was cleansed from his leprosy. God can heal you, but He may not choose to heal you. Once we learn and accept this Bible truth, we can sing with the psalmist in Psalm 103, bless the Lord, O my soul, who forgives all my sins and heals all my diseases. Or we can be content like the Apostle Paul and say, most gladly therefore will I glory in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. I'm Reverend Mike from Fellowship Tabernacle, and we just had a WTF moment.
Jamaica and its workforce are advancing quickly. Life-changing opportunities
are arising. You need training and support. We are the Renewed Heart NSTA Trust, committed to providing new and emerging skills training and opportunities. Come to Heart. We'll help you claim your place in the workforce of the future.
Every Thursday morning, Love 101 shares with you power-packed messages, words of encouragement, and testimonies of God's miraculous power. You get all of that in the Give Up broadcast, brought to you by Celebration Church at the Portmore Skating Rink in the Portmore Mall with Pastor Prophet Michael Carter. Be sure to stay tuned to Love 101 for the Don't Give Up broadcast. Get the word you need to start your day right. The Don't Give Up broadcast, Thursdays at 5:15 a.m. on the family station, Love 101.
Welcome back, listeners. This is Family Time, and we've been discussing empowering your life in the fight against breast cancer. That is the topic. And our hosts with us today are Professor Maya Clark Kataya, inaugural Evelyn Lauder Associate Dean for Nurse Practitioner Programs and professor at Hunter Bellevue School of Nursing, and a 20-year breast cancer survivor, Reverend Eugenie French, a pastor, educator, wife, mother, and grandmother. And may I just add, warrior against
Yes.
the monster of breast cancer.
Yes.
He's also the vice president of Jamaica Reach to Recovery and the vice chair on the board. All right, so we continue our very fruitful and informative discussion. We are sharpening tools here so that we are prepared. Now, the survivor's personal experience, we want to hear that. We want to hear a little bit more, Reverend French, about when you first heard, how did you feel? Was it like, oh my gosh, am I going to die? Am I going to live? What was your first attempt at survival, when you were first diagnosed? Walk us through that.
Yes, thank you. So cancer, my experience with cancer came at a time when I thought I was, making headway into my life. I'd had a very traumatic childhood and young adult life. And I was studying, I was doing my first degree, and I thought I was now on a path. And here comes cancer. So, I felt disappointed, and, I was just thinking, what else? The devil is coming from my life now. And so that's why I said I had to muster up every strength in me to fight, to stay alive, because I believe that I have a purpose. So when I felt that thickening, and some people feels a lump, for me it was a thickening, it was a hardening that was vertical, stretching from the top of my breast down in that vertical way. And immediately I thought about my two aunts, and I said, oh my God, could this be happening? I didn't tell anyone at the time. I went straight to the Jamaica Cancer Society. So it's very important, to have knowledge of where you can go when something like this happens to you. I went there, and of course, I was clinically examined, and they agreed. So I was sent to the hospital because the doctor asked if I had insurance. I said no. And I was referred to the public hospital. And from there, they did further checks, including a mammogram, ultrasound, and a surgical biopsy that revealed that it was indeed breast cancer, and that it was stage 2 breast cancer, ductal carcinoma in situ. So what that means, the doctor explained, is that the cancer was in the site, in the breast duct. And so I was slated to do surgery. The surgery was done on March 15th of 2004. But the day before, when they were preparing me for surgery, the doctor on duty realized that I had a lymph node. And so there was some invasion
Okay.
And the discussion was well, the discussion took place before about whether to do a lumpectomy or a mastectomy. And because of the size of my breast and the fact that there was an invasion, then I quickly, agreed for a mastectomy, which is to remove the entire breast to give me a better chance of survival. And after the surgery, I was started on tamoxifen. These are tablets that are, they say that it's a type of chemo drug.
Yeah.
And so after I was discharged from hospital and kept the appointment with the oncologist, she took me off the tamoxifen and I started on chemotherapy. 8 bouts were determined for me to take, but I could not afford it. So I got 6 bouts of chemotherapy and 3 weeks of radiation. Between after I had 2 months of chemotherapy, my blood count fell because I had to do a blood test before and after each, and so my blood count fell. My white cells were very low, and I kept on doing blood checks and it was not going up, and it was concerning, and I had to receive a medication in the form of an injection called Neupogen to allow the blood count to increase. So I had challenges, on the journey with the chemotherapy, and I praise the Lord. I was, able to continue 6 bouts, 3 weeks of radiation, and afterwards I resumed the tamoxifen tablets, which lasted for 5 years. The doctor said I could not take them more than 5 years.
Okay.
So yes, so that was treatment, and how I was able to stay alive. I was immediately placed in menopause. I was 38 at the time,
Wow.
which
Oh,
was
wow.
the same age that my aunts demised in their 30s.
Oh,
Yes.
wow. I'm 38 now.
Are you doing your mammogram?
Do
Well,
you have family
I'm
history?
well, I have an aunt on my father's side, my father's
Your clock
father's
is ticking.
daughter. Yes, yes,
Yes.
indeed,
Your clock
indeed,
is ticking.
Don't
indeed.
be like me who thought that because it was not in my mother's side that I didn't have to pay attention.
Yes, yes, yes.
Go have the conversation at the very least.
Indeed, indeed, because my last screening was 2 to 3 years ago. But I do my and I'm saying this openly so that we can all practice doing our three-finger checks in the restrooms, in the shower, around the areola and all of that. I tend to do that a lot. But
As well
of course,
as under the armpits, feel
other
for lymph
armpits.
nodes. Yes.
Yes.
Me here, Reverend French has got it.
Well, my other two questions are going to be posted to you, Professor Kataya, because I want to know if this is a typical story that you hear
Yes,
from breast cancer patients.
yes. So her story is very typical for estrogen receptor positive breast
Okay.
cancer. So I am so thankful that you have done so well, Reverend French. I pray that it continues that way.
Thank you.
And I'm also glad that you went in when you did.
Yeah.
I
Yes.
have a girlfriend, as a matter of fact, who during COVID had the exact same experience, felt a lump, thought it was nothing, thankfully went and had her mammogram. Same thing. She was ER positive. She went through lumpectomy times 3. She had 3 of them,
Mm.
and then had radiation, and unfortunately ended up having another lump
Wow.
after all of that. And so now has had both of her breasts as a precaution. I have another girlfriend who is, I'm 42, so she's 39, who has a son who's the same age as my daughter, so 6. thought that it was from breastfeeding, the lump that she felt. Thankfully, had a nurse colleague who was like, no, you should go get that checked out. And she had stage 3 breast cancer. And so what I would recommend for us is to not be afraid and not be ashamed to sound the alarm.
Yes.
If you're wrong, you're wrong. But if you're right, it's the difference between having the choice to dictate what your care looks like,
Yeah.
and having that choice being taken away.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very serious point right there.
Yes.
What your care looks like, and as I said, listeners, to be screened early, because the doctors are able to look at the tissue and say, this looks a little bit suspicious. Let's advance a few things here before it even becomes a lump. That's what I've learned. But again, there's so much to talk about, and the constant message here is to be screened. Listeners, you've been listening to Family Time. We're going to a break. We'll be right back.
The report is out.
What report?
The Constitutional Reform Committee's report of recommendations
Recommendations on what?
on how we move from a monarchy to a republic, of course.
So what's in it?
The creation of the office of president and changes to our parliament. Yes, man. It also includes a new qualification for membership in parliament. I know you want to see that one.
Read the full report at roadtorepublic.mlca.gov.jm.
We are on the road to republic.
Changes are easy and easy. When cheap diapers are difficult to change, it's time for Pampers Easy Up. They're easy to put on and take off, keeping their skin protected. When they begin to crawl, changes are easy and easy.
Yes, welcome back, listeners. This is Family Time, and you've been hearing us unpack from discussions here with Professor Kataya and Reverend French on how to survive breast cancer and how to look for the different risk factors and so on. So let's go a little bit deeper, as I know the time is very short to discuss this situation. This should be a two-part, but we know we're coming up on the end of October, which is Breast Cancer Awareness Month. And of course, how fitting for us to have this discussion at this time. But we want to ask you, Professor Kataya, what are some of the myths around breast cancer, about breast cancer that you encounter? Myths. And I want to ask about my non-conventional treatment of my castor oil compress, right?
Oh, that's one of them. And
Yes.
there are many.
Yeah.
There are concerns about how people are diagnosed, that only older people are diagnosed with breast cancer, only women are diagnosed to breast cancer, that if, like you said, you take certain medications, if you use certain home remedies, that you can reduce the risk of breast cancers, that mammograms don't work, that all of our breasts are the same, which we've already said. You and I have dense breasts. That doesn't mean that everybody else does.
Yes.
That breast cancer is always cured.
Yes.
Is another one. A lot of our women can live with breast cancer as well, and it becomes a
So
chronic.
it's not a
chronic
sentence.
Correct. It can become a chronic condition that we're managing. For example, as Reverend French was talking about, your doctor may put you on something like tamoxifen, which reduces your response to estrogen, to reduce your risk of, the cancer producing itself. That cancer always starts with a lump, in particular, something that you can feel. That's not always true. It could be breast swelling. Reverend French talked about feeling something that was just, a difference in her tissue. It can be dimpling of the breasts. It could be a rash. So if there's anything that's abnormal, you should bring it up. Wire bras and deodorant make your risk of cancer higher. that's not true. Those things have never been evidenced. Or that sugar makes breast cancer grow faster. As we've talked about a little bit before, most of that is related to hormones. And so I hear a lot of this throughout my care. I will say, my caveat is that I'm a surgical nurse practitioner. So I manage patients before they have surgery and after they have surgery. But the conversation that Reverend French had is the conversation that I typically have with patients. Here's what your biopsy looks like. Here are what your options are. Here's what happens if you do this, and here's what happens if you do that. And so I just want to, encourage patients to really open up your hearts, open up your minds to having that conversation. As Reverend French said, trust your providers, reach out to your resources. There are places that you can go to be well supported, where you can find others who are like you. If you don't trust us, because I understand why it's not the first place to go, trust your sisters.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, is breast cancer always hereditary?
It is not.
Okay.
It is not always hereditary, and that is why the recommendations are set up the way they are. The general risk is somewhere around the age of 40. So if you don't know about your family history, starting your mammograms at 40 is as wise as we can possibly be, as safe as we can possibly be. That is typically when we start to see the risk from 40 and up. So it's not always hereditary. It can be. And in those instances, if they are, the goal would be to have you actually have a conversation with a provider before age 40 to have the discussion about when you should be starting your mammograms.
Okay. All right. So, for example, I got my first mammogram and ultrasound done, like as I mentioned, about 3 years ago. So that's what, about 35 years ago. Was that okay, or was I a little bit too previous?
So I think I'm not going to ask you on air what your family's history is, but I always caution patients to think about, as Reverend French said, when it was diagnosed in your family members, so that we can get a gauge of what the situation was. So for example, my family history is not breast cancer, but cardiac arrest, so having heart attacks at 40. I was in my doctor's office at like 29 talking about, what do I have to do to make sure that at age 40 I don't have a heart attack? That's what you want to do.
Yeah.
If it's 40 for your family, you should be in by age 30 having a conversation about, what should I be looking for? When do we need to start mammograms? Is there testing I need to be having? Have that conversation. And then how often you need to have that testing. Because I'm hoping you have testing at 30 and it's so clean that they say, we don't need to see you for 5 to 10 years.
Awesome. Yeah.
That's the conversation you need to be having. So starting early doesn't mean that you have to do it every year that way. It may be every 3 years, it may be every 5 years, but that's a conversation that you have with your provider.
Okay. So what role does lifestyle play? I know we talk about exercise and all of that, but we want to drive that point home. Because based on my observation as a Jamaican woman, I think a lot of our women are very high stress. Um, we go through that a lot, including myself. We have heavily sedentary jobs, many of us. The corporate profile of leaders in the country are primarily women in director roles, managerial roles, and all of that. Sadly, we have quite a significant number. Statistics have told us, and many of us are or conceived out of wedlock. So you have a lot of single mothers. So in layman terms, in my simple brain, I'm thinking the stress of life, poor eating habits, lack of exercise, among other things that seem to be a culture among us that could be causing this thing. But what do you have to say from a medical perspective and with more robust intellectual stuff?
I love this question. I love this question from the the deepest part of my heart. So when I teach nurse practitioners and medical students, I tell them always meet patients where they are,
Yeah.
right? I'm not asking you to go run a marathon, right? Because I'm certainly not going to do that either. But if you work like I do, take plan 2 minutes an hour, stand up, stretch, walk around your office. You can do chair exercises. I don't care. Use your water bottle. Do some, some arm lifts with your water bottle. It is literally that simple. Take some deep breaths for 30 seconds every hour. Try to do small things where you are to build to the big things.
Yeah.
Because I think when we say to people, I need you to do 30 minutes of exercise a day, it seems insurmountable. But if I tell you every hour for the hours that you're working, those 8 hours, if you can find 5 minutes in each of those hours to shut off your screen, to stand up and stretch your back, bend over, touch your toes,
Yeah.
that you can do. Those 8 hours amount to 40 minutes, which is more stretching than the rest of us get.
Okay. All right. So I want to know, do people need counseling before, during, or after? What do you recommend?
Absolutely. I am a huge proponent of support. Um, I think that we should reach out to our resources, whether that's your pastor or your nurse or a trained counselor. I think those are important. I hope that if you have a positive um, biopsy, that you also get a genetics counselor to help you inform what happens to your family, but also inform what happens in your treatment and to help you walk along the road and give you some support as you make decisions. Counseling is imperative to supporting you as an individual.
Awesome. Awesome. Um, now, Reverend French, you're a part of an organization that offers a lot of support. You were mentioning earlier financial support and otherwise. How can listeners get involved in raising awareness and supporting those affected by the disease?
Yes, so no one fights cancer alone, as I said earlier. So we really need to reach out to organizations that promote the or give support to breast
Yes.
cancer patients and their families as well. Certainly, we at Jamaica Reach the Recovery give that kind of support emotionally, psychologically. We are in the breast clinic at the KPH, and we meet every second Tuesday at the Webster Memorial Church Hall, and we are all breast cancer survivors. There's no discrimination. We're all there seeking support, young and old. And sometimes we, like in my case, I didn't tell my husband, my children, or but I did find at least one person that I said I felt something and I feel that it is serious. So we really need to talk to somebody, at least one person that you are comfortable with. I encourage persons to do that, because
Yes.
what it does, it helps emotionally and mentally to bear that strain, and gives you a better chance of not falling into depression and to be stressed out. If you find that one person who will encourage you positively and hold your hand as you try to make your baby steps,
Hold on
that's
to that
important,
person.
very
Excellent.
important.
All right, listeners, you have been listening to us here on Family Time, and we've been sharing a lot about empowering you on your fight if you are a warrior fighting against this monster called breast cancer. Now, remember, early detection is the key, and
Yeah.
of course, self examination is even one of the first steps to becoming aware. Now, for more information on our services or for our counselors in Kingston and other parts of the island, contact our head office at 876-920-1034 or 876-926-8101. Note that for appointments and information on costs, you must call the office. Otherwise, to keep up to date with what's happening with FLM and our programs, check on our Facebook page at FLM-Family Life Ministries, or subscribe to our YouTube channel, Family Life Ministries-FLMJA, and on Instagram at simply FLMJA. Before we leave you, check out this evening's Bible verse, and it's taken from Proverbs 17, verse 22. A cheerful heart is good medicine, but a crushed spirit dries up the bones. Join us again next week for another informative program. Thanks again for our special guests, Reverend Eugenie French and Professor Maya Clark Kutaya. Thanks also to our show producer, Kathy Gale, studio facilitator, Timoy Butler, and of course, you. Have a great week. I'm Crystal Daly Thompson. See you next time.